Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 320th episode of Real Hawk Talk. I am Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Hawk Blogger, and I am so excited about the show tonight. This is a show that's been like a long time coming because it's hard to get some of the busiest people who are doing some of the best work to make time for this show. And Maura Dooley is one of those people, and she found a space in her schedule to come and hang out with us tonight. So if you do not know Maura Dooley, you're gonna by the end of this show, and you're gonna feel very fortunate to having done that. But Maura, welcome to the show. It's so good to see you. How's life?
Thank you. Thank you so much for that kind introduction. Life is good. I'm happy we have some football going on. It's always better with that.
Yes.
And
yes.
I'm repping the Sonics gear tonight, but I have to say my family originally is from Boston. Grew up a Celtics fan, so I have an eye on that as well, just in the corner. But I will totally be paying attention.
Well,
I just might check periodically.
The old Sonics green and the Celtics green, there's some similarity there. You can kind of get away with it. It does a dual purpose. Before I bring in the rest of the crew, so folks that don't know you, Maura, I'd love to just take a second and ask. I mean, so you are a producer at Seattle Sports 710. You work on the Brock and Salk show. I don't know if you produce any of the other shows, or like that's a big handful in and of itself, but just want to clarify.
I mean, that's all right now, but I've kind of done the tour. I started producing John Clayton's show middays, and obviously we miss him very much. He was, he taught me a lot, and yeah, it was just so much football knowledge. So it was really fun. I got to go to a couple of Super Bowls with him, and then after that, I was producing. It was actually, at the time, Jim Moore, Bob Stelton, and Dave Wyman. And then for a while, I produced Wyman and Bob. And then I moved to the mornings with Danny and Paul. And now I'm with Brock and Salk. So not producing anyone else right now, but I've produced a lot of the show.
You've been through the ringer. That is a lot. And also a lot of privileged opportunities, especially with the professor, for sure. And a lot of folks in chat sharing some RIP for Mr. Clayton. So let me bring in the crew, and then I know we all have a bunch of questions for you, and we'll just have a fun conversation about what's going on with the Seahawks and other things. Jeff Simmons at Real Jeff Simmons. How are you doing, my friend? You have a softball game tonight, or you going to be good?
No, it's a Jewish holiday, and I play in a league that the fields are canceled because of it.
I should know that if it's a Jewish.
I wouldn't have known that.
What holiday is it?
It's Shavuot.
I still don't even know what that is.
Yeah.
So
I'm upset I even brought that up. I should have just made up a better excuse.
Wow. Well, we benefit from the holiday. Glad to have you aboard. And Dana O'Gorman at Dana OG on Twitter. Dana, I appreciate that you took a break from gloating about your Kansas City sports teams, the Royals and the Sporting KC. Having some success against our Seattle teams to come and join the show. How are you?
I am good. You know, it was such a fun weekend because literally all the Seattle teams were here. The Mariners were playing the Royals, the Sounders were playing Sporting, and the Rain were playing the Current. And so I expected to see Seattle people everywhere, and I didn't see them. And I'm like, Kansas City's great. People come visit. But yeah, it was fun. And yeah, I can gloat a little bit, but my soccer team's not much to gloat about this season. So I'll take the win and move on.
I pay enough attention to the Sounders to know it's not been a great Sounders season either. Yeah. So I don't think that they're quite as vociferous as they normally are, and their support and the Mariners. I mean, that's a conversation for another day. But the Royals really they stood us up. I mean, and a 7-0 lead, 8-0 lead, and you took it away, and you've done that 2 years. Maybe not 2 years in a row, but I think it might have been 2 years in a row.
Yeah.
I don't appreciate it, Dana.
No, I'm sorry. The Royals, I want to tell you, the last time the Royals were this good, the Seahawks won the Super Bowl and Sporting Kansas City won the MLS Cup. So I'm all in. Like, if the Royals are good, it usually bodes well for me in the future. So fingers crossed.
That's a great segue. That's a
Yeah.
great segue. Maura, so before I actually ask you a little bit about the Seahawks, and I know Jeff and Dana have some questions for you, and we're going to take some patron questions, and Maura, you may get some random questions. Can't promise what's going to be asked, but talk to folks that don't know what a producer does. Like, what is your day-to-day? What are your responsibilities? And then I know you do more than just some of the producer stuff. You actually are doing some of the interviews and sharing some of that as well. So help people understand what producers do.
Sure. I think that most of the time when I tell people I'm a producer, that's the next question I get. They're like, oh, that's really cool. I don't really know what that means. So I would say the majority of it is, especially for my show, Brock and Salk have been together for so long. I don't really see my job as they don't need opinions from me, essentially. Like, they're good at that on their own. So I'm trying to find information and content for them to form opinions around. So cutting up press conferences, looking for sound bites from anything that, like, if you see that Russell Wilson went on a podcast and said something interesting that we might want to go back to because, you know, he's still of interest here, or just things like that. I'll cut up as much sound as I possibly can that I think we can have discussions on, and then booking guests. But that's another thing I have to say. I do a little less now because Brock has very good connections. So a lot of times he's willing to put those to use and probably reach out to someone that's a bigger name than I can land. But that's generally something a producer does a lot of. And then, yeah, Justin and I, after the show, work on podcasting. He's really great with our videos. So all the video clips you see on social media, Justin works on those. So there are two of us producing on that show. And yeah, we're really lucky that they encourage us to be, you know, a part of the show on air as well. So we have a lot of fun, you know, tripping in. Like you said, they let me do interviews sometimes. We play games with them, and getting up at 6, or, you know, the show starts at 6. Getting up at 4 is a lot easier because we do have a lot of fun.
I think I think people that have listened to Brock and Salk can imagine what it's like to collaborate with that pair at 4 in the morning or 5 in the morning, day after day. And I did get to hear. I heard Salk get a little bit. I don't know the right word. A little testy this morning. He didn't get quite the strong opinion out of Brock that he wanted to about DK Metcalf's press conference yesterday. And that's kind of what Brock that's what Salk brings, is he's one of the few people in the entire Northwest that's willing to kind of have an edge to him and bring that out.
Yeah, and I mean, love him or hate him, people listen. We'll get texts from people every day that say that they hate him and argue with him, but they're obviously still listening every day. Yeah. And I think you want that in sports talk. You don't want someone that's just gonna come on and tell you everything is roses all of the time. And Brock really balances that out well. But yeah, we actually, I would say as a producer, that segment you listened to this morning where he got a little testy was probably not as well prepared by me as it should have been. We kind of veered into something during a break, and I should have set it up better.
Oh, I love this falling on the sword. As a producer, I'm gonna make one comment. Hopefully, it's not uncomfortable, but we are, like, with your mic, I think near your hair might be getting a little bit of rubbing. So just if you can help me out, that'll help. Thank you. That'll help me on post production. And I wouldn't ask otherwise, but I know you get it. So tell us, just speaking of what's been going on, we talked about the DK press conference a little bit, and we'll go into more there. You've been at a lot of these practices or some of these OTAs. You've seen Mike McDonald. You've been at the previous regime and know what it was like there. Just tell us a little bit about your impressions about what's different and kind of the stories that have caught your attention so far. Yeah,
I think first blush, when the first one I went to, I was actually surprised because Salk and I were like, this doesn't feel that different. Like, you wouldn't just showing up know immediately that there had been a huge change. But like, as you dig in a little more, you do start to notice I mean, to me, it's just, and it makes sense because they're teaching a whole new system. There's a lot of new coaches, but you can just really see the communication level and see that everybody is yelling things out to each other. The coaches have walkie-talkies. It's just very efficient. And I also feel like when I went out there yesterday, I was noticing there's no wasted time. Like, I thought it was interesting that PJ Walker, even though he's third string quarterback, just got here, he's probably not ready to go. And I think I've seen a lot of third string quarterbacks in the past just kind of stand around and watch when it's not their turn. They had him running all the drills with the passing drills with the running backs, while Sam Howell and Gino were throwing to the receivers most of the day. So it just feels like, and pretty much anytime they're not doing like 7-on-7 or 11-on-11s, they're breaking people off into other groups and they're always doing something. So I feel like they talked a lot about the teaching, and it just seems like it never stops. And then Mike McDonald said after practice that they finished 15 minutes early from what he had planned, and he was really happy with that. So I think there's just this feeling of efficiency and communication that maybe you didn't see before, but that's not necessarily a knock on Pete Carroll. They had been in the same system for so long.
So this is what's interesting to me, Maura. I get a little flack from these boys because I'm a big fan of Pete Carroll, and I loved his personality. I loved everything about him. And Mike McDonald has come in, and let's be honest, he's tame. I've stopped calling him beige because I think that offended people. It's like, so I think he's kind of tame. And then you're right. It was hilarious today when he was so excited that they finished this couple minutes early. And he was like, everything seems very precise. Everything seems to be Excel spreadsheeted out. Like, it's very this. And then Devin Witherspoon today said, oh, he's teaching us like in the nerdiest way or something about that. What is your impression of Mike McDonald? Because he is vastly different than what we've been used to there in our head coach, and who was, vivacious for his age and all the things that people say about him. What is your initial impression of our new HC?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's quite the contrast. I definitely feel like they both have their unique styles, and neither is wrong. I think they both can work, but I don't think Mike McDonald's going to be, doing the basketball tournaments with all the music going and the hype and everything. I definitely think that he's maybe going to rely, but he still seems like he lets the players be themselves to a certain extent. Like, I still see Witherspoon out there. Kevon Wallace is a new one who is just constantly yelling something and dancing and seems to have a lot of personality. So I think maybe he's just going to rely on the players to kind of create that fun a little more than Pete Carroll did. And then it was interesting yesterday that he was saying that he formed some sort of leadership group with the players. I said there's 9 members. I talked to Mike Morris. We're going to air it tomorrow. And I asked him about that today. And he was like, I'm not really aware of that. Like, I think I've heard it mentioned, but they haven't apparently made it apparent. Like, they haven't told the players who these veteran leaders in the leadership group are. So he was joking, maybe it's a secret society.
It's funny. We actually have a question in our Patreon group about that. So I'll let you answer that later.
So I kind of get the feeling, and he talked about letting the players build the culture too. I think he's going to be more down to business, and I think they'll still have some fun going on, but he's going to rely more on the players to do that. It's not going to be like the coach pumping it up. Right.
Yeah. Because it just seems like, I was wondering if, as things start to fall in place, and as, he's like, I was on another podcast earlier today, and she was talking about how it was like, he's big into his percentages. We're 10% in, we're 50% in, all that sort of thing. If once he would kind of calm down and the newness wore off, if he would lighten up a little bit. But I agree with you. He said that he had a lot of respect for Pete Carroll and what he brought there, but he's not Pete Carroll. And so it'll be interesting to see where that balance comes in from.
I agree. And I think that it would be inauthentic if he tried to be more like Pete Carroll. And one of the big things that he's talked about is how one of the main takeaways he had from the Harbaughs was how they were just themselves and they weren't phony, and that people will see through that.
Love it.
Yeah, we're trying to help Dana.
I'm getting there.
Exhale, let go of the past, you know, like reflect on it,
mean,
but like, you know, it's time to kind of embrace the
I mean,
change. It's
he's
okay.
a larger than life character. It's
Yeah.
it's hard.
I'm getting there slowly. The OTAs and minicamp helped a little bit. It did.
Yeah, Dana, you're not wrong. We give you a hard time, but we're just, it's all in good fun. But Brian will verify this, Maura. I take in probably an alarming amount of Seahawks content. Like, I'm sending him everything I'm reading or listening, and he gives me crap on the side. And one of the things I send him everything. And one of the things I did recently send him, so I'm not just saying this, was your interview with Jonathan Hankins, who I think is a guy no one's really talking about. There's so much investment in that defensive line. And I thought that interview was awesome. I thought you got a ton out of him, and I thought you really made him comfortable. So, like, was there anything you learned from that you didn't know, or is there anyone else you're like really excited to talk to? You mentioned Mike Morris, but I thought that interview with Hankins was really cool.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm still, I feel like it's something I love doing. Like I was doing sideline reporting for the XFL for a minute there, and then COVID shut that down. So I'm trying to get more practice, so I appreciate that. But yeah, Hankins, I thought the same thing. I thought no one's really talked about him since he came over, but I'm intrigued to see what he brings. I think he probably doesn't get as much attention because he's a really good run stopper, and that's just not as sexy as someone who's racking up sacks. But I thought.
Hold on. Did you just say stopping the run is not sexy? Because
I forgot who I'm talking to. Sorry.
Have you watched this team the past 2 years? I think I would it'd be bad news for Rachel, but I would marry Jonathan Hankins, whether he wants me to or not, if he could help stop the run. I'm so sick of watching this team defend the run. Now, sorry, continue. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Fair enough. I just think to the general fan base,
you're
maybe
right.
You don't
you're
pay
right.
attention. But yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think what stood out to me was when I asked him why he chose Seattle, no hesitation. Immediately, he was like, "Oh, Dirty, the defensive coordinator." Like, I wanted to work with him more because I think that he's kind of a mystery. He's a first-time defensive coordinator who was a D-line coach in Dallas, and we don't know exactly how that's going to go. Obviously, McDonald's still going to call the plays, but he is the one I'm seeing hands-on with everybody out there at camp. So that I thought was nice to hear, just because there's just so much up in the air that we're all wondering about this team right now.
Maura, I've got to ask you maybe the most important question, and I've waited till now to do it, but I feel like I need to understand how you were able to let us all down in the race against Salk. I mean, I was certain, you know, I've never met you or seen you race, but I'm like, I have a lot of confidence in you in this race. And then he pulled his hamstring, and I thought you were just going to really put it in his face, but you didn't do it. So how are you recovering from what was a really bitter defeat?
Yeah, I'm sorry to everyone that I let down. That was sad. Yeah, you're right. And once he did pull his hamstring, I probably should have pushed harder, and because I only lost to him by like a second. I thought he was faking. I thought he was mocking me because he did jump out to a lead. So I was mad about that, but he wasn't. Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I've always run, but it was, or I think I told you that before we started. It was distance, and I've never been a good sprinter. They used to put me in the 400 meter to warm up for my mile, and I got smoked every time. But it would make me run a better mile, like that warm up. So I didn't challenge him because I thought I was super fast. I just thought Salk was going to be more out of shape than that. He surprised me a little bit.
That's what I thought too. So, curious a little bit about, I mean, you've talked to Pharaoh Brown. I sound like you and Salk had a good conversation there. You were the first person I heard observe that like Tariq Woolen seemed to have put on a little more muscle than he was last year. Anything else observation wise, or maybe less mainstream details that maybe have stuck out to you, either about a player or a coach that maybe you want to share, or even about those two guys that you've already spent some time with?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely excited for Pharaoh Brown. As like I said, my family's from Boston. My dad's still a diehard Patriots fan, and I have to admit that I don't watch as much because I'm so focused on Seattle teams out here. But he was a big fan. Really liked him as a blocker, and I know that that's what Schneider was excited about as well. And they lost some of that with Disley gone, so I am excited to see what he can do. And he is huge in person. I mean, between him and Fant, they have some size with their tight ends. I'm really excited that George Fant's back too. I've been wanting to. He was one of the other people I thought about talking to before I got Mike Morris today, because I am a little nervous about the Abe Lucas situation. And then I'm excited to see Christian Haynes a little more. It's interesting to me that they've been giving McClendon Curtis all the reps at right guard with Anthony Bradford out. And I think what they say they like is just that he can move around and play a little bit of everything. But it seems like a lot of the draft analysts and a lot of maybe Lewis Riddick, some of the other experts we've talked to really liked Haynes. And so I'm hoping maybe at some point in camp, we're going to get to see him with the ones. I saw at one OTA, him and Byron Murphy matching up together. And but they can't really do much other than lock up right now. So I would love to see that actually happen in training camp. Byron Murphy is in person is quite the sight to see. He is just all muscle.
Yeah, that seems to be the consensus. You know what, Dana? Why don't we do Patreon questions? And while you pull those up, Maura, one thing that I did want to just follow up with about the DK interview yesterday, and I talked about it a little bit on the show this morning as well, but he was a little bit faint in his praise about Jackson Smith and Jigba, and it sounded like maybe that you felt the same way, that maybe there was an opportunity for him to be more effusive and he maybe held back a little bit. Is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, I think, and that's what you referenced earlier, that Salk earlier today was kind of like ready to dig into that. And I was like, well, I don't want to assume that I know why he did that, but I cut so many of these press conferences. Like I just cut Leonard Williams today, and he was asked about, I think, Devin Witherspoon and Byron Murphy. And I mean, those were like 30-second long answers where he talked about a lot of their traits and what he thinks they can do. And, Jackson Smith and Jigba, the first question he was asked about him, he kind of said like, yeah, I think the next step is for him to be more consistent. I think everybody can be more consistent, and moved into everybody. And then the next question was like about his rookie season, was like 5 seconds long. And he said he had a good rookie season, but I mean, I didn't want to necessarily take it as he's trying to take shots at him or anything. Just maybe he's trying to push him or thinks that he has more to prove because he is going into his second year. But I did definitely notice it. It's not generally the way we hear people answer questions about their teammates.
Yeah. Well, I think DK is becoming one of the more polarizing figures. You can say the same thing, and two different people will interpret it either as people are way too hard on him, he's an amazing player, or we need to trade this guy, he's a bum. And he's not anywhere close to the Russell Wilson level of polarization or even the Pete Carroll level of polarization. But given the current group, he is a guy that people have pretty strikingly different opinions on. So it's going to be something to watch. And it is fascinating that a guy that's clearly one of the best players on the team, I would be pretty shocked, and I think most people would be, if he was on this leadership team. And so I think that says something, about how, and, he talked about not going to voluntaries and all this kind of stuff. It's an interesting situation, one to monitor for the next year as his contract will be due to be renegotiated next year. All right. So we do this thing more where we have our patrons who ask us questions every week. And if you'd be willing, we're going to do a few of those. Do you have time for a few more questions?
Of course. Yeah.
All right. Dana, tell us what the folks have for us this week.
All right. So we're going to start with Jen. And Brian, I'm interested in your take on this, because we talked about it a little bit before, but she wants to know, how worried are we at, I love how worried are we is one thing I want to know. How worried are we at linebacker given Mike's comments about Dodson and the other dude, question mark? That's funny.
Mr. Baker.
Jerome Baker.
Yes. Scale of 0 to nuclear.
Oh, I don't know that I could get to nuclear. First of all, hello, Jen. Good to hear from you. I don't know if we could get to nuclear on almost any position this year with Mike McDonald's team. Like, I think that this is a transition year, and I don't think that means it's a step back year, as some people have indicated. I do think this is going to be a better team on both offense and defense, but this is not a year where I'm expecting contention for anything significant. So I just couldn't get to nuclear in this year about any position. But that said, I will be surprised if the Seahawks do not make at least one move at the linebacker position before they break camp. And we heard today that they actually did bring in somebody. I want to say his name's like Blake something or other. I tweeted about him, but I've already forgotten his name. So he's that well known. But you know, it's interesting because he's a younger free agent. He played a few snaps for the Vikings a couple years ago, had some decent level of play, but it's not a Quan Alexander or a Zach Cunningham or a Shaquille Leonard, any of these guys that are more well-known, but are older and have some pretty big question marks about them. So I think that they are setting themselves up to have a solid starting group at linebacker that is very thin depth-wise. And then they're going to make bigger decisions going into next year. And it was good news to hear Tyrese Knight had a good day today, and has been kind of coming on a little bit. But I still think he is a project and not someone that we should expect to see getting meaningful snaps this year unless there's a major issue. So on a scale of 0 to maybe 10, I would say my concern level is like a 7 at linebacker in terms of it is arguably the least deep position group on this roster.
Yeah. Maura, do you have any thoughts on the linebacker group, or have you seen anything that maybe will give us some encouragement there?
No, I mean, I would say 7's probably about right, just because they're not practicing. And so you're watching O'Connell and Radigan out there with the ones, and that's not really, I think, going to be what we're going to see in season. So you're not accomplishing any teaching there in that department. I really liked the acquisitions of Baker and Dotson. I think they were both guys that, for different reasons, I think Dotson kind of worked his way up from not getting much playing time with the Bills, and then, or maybe I'm mixing them up. And then Baker had some injuries, but they both kind of came on strong recently, and I think they have a lot of upside. But yeah, it's I mean, even McDonald admitted that it's, not his ideal situation. And then today when Leonard Williams was asked about it, I think they said, like, are you getting to know these guys despite them not being on the field? And he was like, no, that's difficult. So I think there's room for concern for sure, but I'm hoping that we keep hearing about the versatility of this defense and how they can move people around. I'm hoping that even if they maybe start off a little bit behind, or like you said, have to bring someone in late, that McDonald can cover that up with some of the other strengths that they have.
Yeah. Yeah. His comments about Radigan were funny. He's like, well, he's getting better every day. Like that was the nicest thing he could say. Oh, it cracked me up a little bit. All right. So next question. Let's see. Jeff, I'm going to send this one to you. It's from Trenches, no matter what is what the name is. Since John wants to draft a quarterback every year, but has so far refused to do so, are there quarterbacks in the last 3 or 4 years that you would have wanted to take a flyer on? Howell, Pratt, even Levis?
The hard one to wrap your head around is honestly Howell, because they've come out now and they've said, well, we love Sam Howell going into the draft. And that draft was the year that Russell got traded. So if there was a year to take a flyer on a quarterback, it was that year. And that was at that time, could have had no idea Gino would become a serviceable starting quarterback. So if you look back, he went in the first pick of the 5th round. And they took Kobe Bryant, who's now like a fringe of the roster. So it's hard for me to hear like we take a quarterback every year thing, and then they have to trade essentially a 3rd round pick to get a guy they could have drafted 2 years earlier. So I think that year is the hardest one to wrap your head around. Like Levis, I had heard, did not interview well with a number of teams. And that's why he fell completely out of the 1st round. I heard it was more a character question than anything else. So if the Seahawks weren't high on him, that would not have surprised me. And Pratt was someone you probably could have convince yourself into taking this year, but like I wasn't that upset. I thought they made their move with Howell. I don't think adding a third quarterback, but there's been years where they just could have taken a flyer, and you see the other side of it. San Francisco, they got the luckiest thing, but they took a flyer on Brock Purdy, and look what he's done there. So it's hard for John to keep saying, well, in Green Bay, we took quarterbacks every year. And they actually did. Like, they got Mark Brunell and Aaron Brooks and Matt Hasselbeck, and those kind of players worked for them. So other than Russell Wilson, they really haven't even done it. So the Sam Howell one is the hardest one to square your head around, because they actually did like him, and they still took Kobe Bryant over him, who's now like the 5th safety. So I think that's the one that kind of leaves John's words a little empty.
Cool.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that. It's that I can't think of any really specifics outside of him, but that felt like they had a lot of capital that draft. They could have spent one. And I think Schneider has a good eye for quarterbacks, or I've been led to believe that he does from the sample size we have and from some of the guys they have said they've liked. So I don't know why you wouldn't want to get one later in the draft, and you can trade them later and get something for that if you don't end up playing them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I thought of all years, this year might be the one they did it. You know, Pete was gone. He's not pushing for more defensive players or whatever. Still didn't. So we'll have to hold him to it next year. Maybe we'll see. All right, Maura, I'm going to give this one to you because I think that you have a bird's eye view to some of this. So this is from Hawks fan Matt Mann. It says, have any of the league's many scandals over the years ever caused you to consider no longer watching football? Now, the reason why I want you to answer this one, because you kind of have a front row seat. You get the viewer feed or the listener feedback. You get the emails. You get all of that. Has there ever been a scandal that you thought, oh, this might be it. This might topple the NFL or topple the Seahawks or another team or whatever, that you just got a huge fan reaction out of?
Oh man. I mean, I feel like you hear from time to time people saying that the league is going to lose viewership over things, or people saying that they're not going to watch anymore, but I don't think I've ever really felt that threat was viable. And I know that I personally, even though I've been frustrated with the way they handle things, like especially domestic violence situations, and I just think Roger Goodell pretty much always makes the wrong decision, and then when there's public outcry, tries to cover it up or fix it later. It's frustrating, but I know that I would have a hard time ever giving up on it, unfortunately. And I think they know that too.
Right.
They know that they can get away with a lot because we still tune in every Sunday. But yeah, I haven't really felt like there was a real threat. No.
Billion-dollar businesses are hard to topple, and it would take a serious scandal, I think, to do that. What about either one of you guys? Have you ever said, that's it, I'm not watching anymore?
I didn't have the that's it part. I would say there's two things that were troubling. One, honestly, the Pete Russ divide in the fan base was the least amount of fun I've had as a Seahawks fan. And it was very just toxic, and it felt like a civil war. And I don't know, it felt like politics. And it's like, ugh, I just really, really, really did not like that part of being that time as a Seahawks fan, especially on Twitter. And then the Colin Kaepernick deal, not because of what Kaepernick did, but the discourse around it and how politicized it became. And I don't know for you guys, but one of the things I love about sports is that it's this great unifier that you talk, I'm at a game and I'm hugging somebody that's, different race, religion, political affiliation, background, like everyone just blends into the jersey that they're wearing. And it's one of the things I've always just really loved about sports. And that was a point where it really became, again, polarizing. And there was restaurants in Washington that were taking down Seahawks stuff. And, I just, that was really, it wasn't that I wasn't going to not watch it, but the fact that there were people in that mode and that they were turning against it, that wasn't a fun time either. But it was a pretty important time. So not saying I wish it didn't happen, but that was the only other time that comes to mind for me.
Yeah.
I can tell you like an opposite end of that story. Back early in my sports media career, when I was working in Toronto, I worked at like the equivalent of like a Fox Sports. It's called Sportsnet in Toronto. It's a big media conglomerate. They own the Blue Jays. So I was in the newsroom, and this was in either 2011 or 2012. And that was when the concussion thing really got going. and they were filming this show near my desk at work. And they had all these like big J journos from our office talking about like the big issues in sports. And I remember 3 guys who were like established writers, radio hosts, were talking about concussions. And they were saying by 2020, no one's going to play football anymore. And I started laughing. I was off to the side and they had to stop filming the show. They're like, what is so funny? I'm like, that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, there is no way like Americans are going to stop playing football. And they're like, no, the concussion numbers are so bad. I remember last year when the TV ratings came out for like, I think people, like 40 million people watched. They're like, by 2021, no one's going to be playing football anymore. I sent that screenshot to like my boss. I'm like, see, 10 years later, I don't even work with this guy anymore. And I'm like, I was right. And now the numbers have like tripled on TV, and like so many people watch the draft now. And it's like that concussion story really got some hot takes out there. And not to make light of concussions, they have really made good changes. And that was an issue like in the 80s. And you've seen all the sad stories that have come out of that. But I just knew there was no way people would stop watching football. And being right is something I definitely enjoyed a little bit. Not gonna lie.
So chat brought up a really good point. It's like if Saints in the chat, it says if Saints fans didn't stop watching NFL games, there's no chance. True. If your coach is paying people to hurt people and you still watch the team, I guess then yeah, there's nothing much that's going to topple it. That's for sure. All right. So Brian, I'll send this one to you. This is from Colin. Oh, I'm sorry. It's the same question. Colin also wanted to know about the linebackers. I apologize for that. So we'll skip that one. So we'll go to Derek. Knowing how big you guys are on the trenches, which of the following is a better outcome in 2024 to you? Rankings can be PFF grade or some other metric, but should factor in both run and pass. He has a caveat there.
Okay.
So a top 10 offensive line and a 20th defensive line, or a top 10 defensive line and a 20th offensive line. Which would have a greater impact?
Oh, that's a fantastic question.
It is.
It's a fantastic. So I have to be consistent in that. I think the offensive line is what has the biggest impact overall for a team, and even helping the defensive line. I hate to make the same point that Jim Harbaugh made heading into the draft, where he really hammered the importance of the offensive line, but it matches my philosophy about how to build a team. And so if you could have a top 10 offensive line, then I'm pretty sure you're going to have a top 5 offense with the way this offense is put together and the play caller that they have. And then you project that out to the impact it's going to have on the defense, fewer plays. This is already a good defensive line and a good defense in general. You're going to have people having to pass more, which is going to be going to the teeth of that secondary. So I'd have to go that direction. I certainly, from a what do I enjoy watching more, I would love watching a top 10 defensive lines. But in terms of what would be most important for the well-being of the team, I think it would be the offensive line.
Maura, do you agree with him?
Yeah, I so want to flip it because of
do it
because of the defense we've been watching for so many years. Like I just want to say that, but I mean, we've seen. Not you were talking about it would make it probably a top 5 offense. We've seen them finish close to the top 10 in Gino's first full season,
even last year.
And they had a bad defense that year, and they still made the playoffs. So I think you do have a better shot at getting into the playoffs if you have that offensive line rolling better than. But man, I really hope the defense won't be 20th.
Right. I agree. Because I don't like offense. I like defense. So no, thank you.
You and me both, Dana.
I know. All right. This one, Maura, I'm going to send this one to you too. It says in Maffei's press conference, he opened up by saying he was being used in different ways, getting different opportunities and being moved around a lot on the field. And we talked about that a little bit earlier in the show. But he also said his role of outside linebacker remains the same. What do you think he meant? And kind of maybe elaborate on what you've seen of, they were talking about Draymond Jones is moving around, like they're moving everybody around.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting to see play out, because when I talked to Mike Morris today, he also said, because they wanted him to move inside and put on weight last year, he also said that I think he plans on being outside a little more this year. So I'm really curious to see as well. I'm not positive how that's all going to work. It sounds like that. I mean, some of it might be just some disguising before the play and then maybe shifting back to where you would originally expect them to be. But they're not showing a ton of that right now. So we're at least, not at full pace. So it's a little hard to get a feel for. I'm excited to see in training camp how that looks. But I wish I had a better answer. I'm not exactly sure how it's all going to play out.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good answer, actually. And it is a good question because, and you mentioned the two players that have done this, they both contradicted their own words in the same conversation. I've heard Mike Morris say, "Oh, I'm doing what I've done before, which is I am a heavy 5 tech and a 3 tech, which can be inside and out." And then in the same conversation say, "Yeah, I'm not doing what I did at Michigan." Well, which is it, Mike? And then you're talking about Boye Mafe, who, by the way, smart, articulate, talented, but man, he says so little. Like he says very little, and he's very like.
I think he got the full media training after his rookie season. Like he's good at giving you those answers that aren't really telling you anything.
You're like, I don't think I learned anything, and he just talked for 10 minutes. But he said, they're using me in different ways, and then he says, "No, I'm still just an outside linebacker, and I have to set the edge." Like, so yeah, I agree. I don't think we can just hear their words. I think we're going to have to see it on the field before we really get an answer.
I forgot I was muted. Sorry. Okay. So interesting, Jeff. I want to pose this question to you kind of as an offshoot from this one. So it was a question that was asked of me earlier today. We know that Pete Carroll kept everything super simple, right? He kept everything very basic. Mike McDonald looks like he's making it really complicated. Now he's moving players all over. Is there a chance that this gets too complicated in his first year as a head coach and that he'll have to scale it back at some point?
Oh, absolutely. And I've been warning people about that, which has led to my kind of outlook on the team. And if you remember his first year in Baltimore, he actually referenced this in an interview he did with Albert Breer the other day, which they had on their station at 710 the other day. But he said one of the things they had that issue in Baltimore when he first got there. And they had a game against Miami where they blew like a 35-10 lead. And they really struggled with a lot of the details. And that was my whole kind of outlook on the team, that it's going to be a really complicated defense, and especially for the linebackers that haven't been on the field. And they do so many things that require such strong detail. I think there might be an adjustment period or a game that just looks silly. And so they might have to just go back to basics. And again, I think that's all part of the learning curve. And that's why my whole outlook on this year is like, I don't really care if they win a lot of games or not, but by the end of the year, you want to see that they're building towards something. And so the defense is going to be really complicated. And Leonard Williams has talked about playing 6 different spots. I know that's not different than what he did before, but I think there's just so many variations to their different looks. And a lot of people forget, like when Sean McVay came in, like he wasn't running any plays that didn't look any different than the rest of the league was doing. It was how he dressed everything up. And I think that's what McDonald does. And that's why people have made that comparison between McDonald and McVay so much, because they have a similar style. So the whole reason Pete ran a really basic defense is so people didn't have to think and they can just play quickly and use instincts. And I know Rayshon Jenkins, who's been around the league, he's talked about there's going to be a lot of detail. And it took them essentially until the second year in Baltimore to master the scheme. And that's where everything kind of hit, where you had Clowney come in and they just said, just go, and the rest of everything kind of worked together. So yeah, I would not be surprised at all. I've been kind of preparing for it. I've been trying to prepare everyone else for it. If I'm wrong, I'm happy. That means I'll gladly be wrong about that. But I've kind of figured that was going to be the case, Dana.
What's really interesting on that, Jeff, is I think one of the things to watch is going to be when things got complicated with Pete's approach, he simplified to help. Like he stripped things away to make it simpler for the players. I have a feeling McDonald's going to strip away players until he finds players that can come up to the sophistication that he wants to run his defense. And so that'll be an interesting, like, he doesn't strike me as we're going to simplify this for you kind of guy. And neither does Ryan Grubb for that matter.
It's fair. I think it's good. All right. So this is our last question. And it was our most popular question. It's more of a comment, but I do have a question to go after. So this is from Brendan. Are we worried Mike McDonald is modeling his leadership style after Sauron? He gave power to a group of 9 men, much like when Sauron gave 9 rings of power to 9 kings, turning them into his subjects and eventually wraiths, I think that's how you said it, who could only serve his will and power of the One Ring. The only reason why I read this, it has like 12 likes and laughs and stuff. So good for you, Brendan. I love it. But I do think we need to talk about this leadership group for just a minute. So well done. It was a great question, guys. But so this leadership group, I got into it with Evan, and which he didn't respond to, I want to admit. So Evan was throwing a little bit of shade saying, oh, look, he has a leadership group. Look, we're so in the times now because that's not something Pete Carroll ever did. And it was something Pete Carroll did. So it drove me crazy. But I love you anyway, Evan. So, Maura, what have you heard about this leadership group? Do we have any idea who's in it? Do we have any idea, other than the comments that were made today, about kind of what their role will be?
Yeah, well, I only heard what he said yesterday. I think McDonald talked again today, and I didn't get to that. But I know yesterday when he brought it up, the only person he mentioned specifically was Laken Tomlinson. So it is interesting to see a new guy, but also a veteran that's been around in there. And I don't know if you heard him talk yesterday, but he was really interesting to listen to and personable. So that makes sense. And he talked about wanting to help younger guys. But yeah, I think he just thinks that it's going to help be a way to help get his messaging in between the groups of players and a way for him to kind of pick his guys. I mean, I did think it was interesting when I talked to Mike Morris today that it doesn't seem like it's been made known to the rest of the team who these guys are. So I would think that maybe it's because they just figured this out, but maybe the leaders are going to be secret. I don't know.
A secret society. That is all of our Patreon questions, Brian.
Well, I have, thank you for that. And thanks to folks, patreon.com/hawkblogger. It's been great. All the support and getting access to the Slack channel, asking us questions, and over $260,000 donated to charity over the years. So thank you all for supporting, and hopefully we'll continue doing all this great stuff. But as far as the leadership team goes, I am kind of curious. One, do you guys have some bets about who's on this team outside of Laken Tomlinson? And two, who is Frodo in this? Who's Frodo? Who's Sam? Like,
apparently Mike is Mike
Morris. he is not. Like, maybe Mike Morris is Gollum or something following along the way. I don't know. I hope not. I'm a geek, so I get to play along.
Very fun.
But yeah, do you guys have guesses about who you would assume is on this leadership team?
I'm like 99% positive that Uchenna Nwosu is.
Yes.
He seems like a go-to guy for everyone.
I would think Tyler Lockett.
Jaron Reed.
Yep.
Maybe
you would
Julian
hope Gino.
Love.
Gino.
Oh yeah.
Gino, I would think. Typically, a lot of people are taken back by this leadership group. And if you're someone like me who watches Hard Knocks, and a lot of teams have been doing this. This is not I think the Lions were on a couple years ago, and when Dan Campbell came in, they did something like this. And I think McDonald said it yesterday. The typical guys in these spots, so obviously he's seen this before, are veterans who've been around the room to see the feel of the locker room. So Jaron Reed's been on two other teams. Leonard Williams would be a logical guess. Julian Love. Laken Tomlinson's been on 3 other teams. Gino's been on a bunch of other teams. Lockett seems like the most logical receiver.
You don't think D. Eskridge? We could throw D. Eskridge in there. Come on. You could do it. He's been around a couple of years now. Just kidding.
Oh my God.
Just
yeah.
Who we missed?
Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see. And I agree with Maura. It was fascinating to me, and it speaks to the state of this team, that one of the last guys to be signed this offseason in Laken Tomlinson to a 1-year deal was already put on this team, this leadership team. It is not a deep bench when it comes to veteran leadership on this group. It's a young group, and it's going to be kind of fascinating to see how that plays out. Also fascinating to see that Mike McDonald was asked about what it means for Gino Smith to take the next step, and he talked about poise and leadership in moments of adversity. I don't know that we heard much about that. I don't know if any of you guys have that, where the implication is Gino, when things were wrong, was like taking it to players and maybe like not. I don't know. Did you guys? Is that something, Jeff? You're like nodding your head.
I think it was on either your show or on
Yeah.
710. But Brady was talking about this, and so it must have been on 710. So more knows exactly what I'm talking about. So Brady was talking about this, where he said, like, he was talking to someone with the Seahawks off the record. He said the one thing like they're blown away by is after a game, Gino will take all like the credit for everyone's mistakes, and he's really good at handling press conferences. But apparently, in game when things go wrong, that's an area they need to work on it. So it was interesting to hear McDonald verify this. And Peter talked about before, he gets like really emotional, and in the moment, he kind of loses himself sometimes. And we all saw that Chargers game where they had to like calm him down when he was. So that might be something. Brady had talked about that before. And so McDonald verified kind of everything he had said. So apparently once the game ends, he's great.
Yeah. So Brady Henderson actually texted me today because I think he's writing something about this and said, do you remember when Pete Carroll was on with you guys? And did he call Gino a hothead? And I was like, I was thinking about the same thing. So I went back and looked at the sound today. So he did. I was back in November of 2022. They had just won a game against the Rams. I think it was November or maybe December. But they won the game on a late pass from him to DK, I think. But he had gotten fired up in that game too. And so I just went back and listened to the sound. And Pete Carroll said straight up, he's a hothead and he gets pissed off. And he said, but then in a very Pete way, he said, you take guys for the good and the bad, and we just work with him on it. And it's like not that big of a deal. And sounds like maybe Mike McDonald is saying, well, that's something we'd actually like you to work on. It's not just you take the good and the bad. Because I think he thinks as a leader, you need to do that.
Yeah. And if I'm not, I might be remembering this wrong, but I'm not sure Gino was like a captain initially or not. Maybe he was, but like there was some stuff where it is interesting to hear these things. And as someone who is also a hothead when it comes to football, I can't say I'm upset to hear that there's someone that's getting mad when things aren't going well. But a couple more quick things, and then obviously more. We'll let you go and watch the Celtics. Probably, they might drop game 3. It's okay. They'll win the series. You'll be okay. But DK, we talked about him with faint praise for JSN. I also noticed when he talked about what's going to be great about this offense, he went through every skill position player pretty much, but he didn't mention Gino. And he also, talked about Gino kind of learning the offense and coming together. There is opportunities for him to speak up about Gino. And I remember in past years, he was pretty positive about Gino, and it seemed like there's been a shift there. So I don't know if maybe some of this anger that we're talking about in games has been directed at one of the other hotheads on that roster, but I guess that'll be something to kind of monitor. So Maura, I have to ask, is there anything that you can tell us? It's just the four of us here. So it's just, don't worry about this getting out. Anything about Brock and Salk that we can use against them? A story, a pet peeve, anything that you've learned in your time supporting them that we can use to needle them over the next year?
I mean, I think I do a pretty good job of needling Salk every day. I'm kind of my job on the show. Oh man, I'm trying to think of anything specific off the top.
Any other story that you have?
Brock's thing is just anytime you want to talk about, the business of college athletics and why they should get paid. He just, he loves the way that it was, and this is hard for him. And anytime Salk talks about why college athletes should be paid, they get into a big debate on that one. So I don't know. That's the first thing that comes to mind with Brock that he'll get like really fired up about.
All right. That's good to know. That's good to know. I won't push you to get any more uncomfortable than that, at least on air. But also, you and I happen to do the same hike, Annette Lake, within a week of each other. Are you a Northwest hiker, or is this just a rare occurrence?
I've done a few since I moved here. I feel like I was a little more avid about it when I lived in Colorado, which is weird because there's so many pretty places to hike here. I guess I just haven't gotten out enough. But yeah, I had a friend who lives out in Snoqualmie that wanted to try that one in that lake, and it was really pretty. I couldn't believe it was like I did that, and then I didn't bring my dog. I don't know why. I thought it was further than it was, and I wasn't sure how she would do the car ride. So I had to walk my dog that morning, and then I had to walk my dog when I got back.
Oh my God.
I ended up doing like 11 miles today.
That's a lot. That is a lot.
But you saw goats.
Yeah, I saw like mountain goats, 3 mountain goats, and my dog had definitely thoughts about that encounter. It was he did not know what he was looking at or smelling. It definitely affected him for the rest of the hike. But
Aww.
yeah, it was fun. It was fun. Well, Maura, I want to thank you so much for coming on. It's been great to talk to you, and tell folks where they can find you and what's coming up maybe on Brock and Salk that they should tune into.
Sure. I'm on Twitter or X, sorry. It's at Maura, MAURA _Dool, DOOL. There's a like famous Irish poet with my exact same name, so I couldn't get that handle. Someone actually looked me up the other day and was like, I tried to find your age and it says you're like a 68-year-old poet. I'm like, yeah, that's not me. But coming up on Brock and Salk tomorrow, we had a conversation after the show today that we recorded with Casey Sadler, former Mariner. So he was great, and he still loves this city and the team so much. So that was a fun conversation catching up with him. And then my Mike Morris interview that I recorded today will also be airing tomorrow. And then Salk is going to Europe for a couple of weeks starting Friday. So you'll just get more of Brock and Justin and I. Nice. Well, looking forward to that. Thank you so much for coming on, Maura. We'll definitely love to do this again. Everyone, make sure you check out Maura at MAURA _DOOL on, I still call it Twitter, X, whatever. And good luck to you. Hopefully you get whatever basketball outcome you're looking for. I honestly don't care about this particular finals, so I'm happy for whatever you want to have. Thank you again, Maura. Thank you, guys. All right, take care. All right, that was Maura Dooley on the show. And I mean, what a great guest. And I think someone that is really knowledgeable in sports that I don't think everybody gets a chance to hear because she kind of does things behind the scenes. But I am 100% going to be listening to that Mike Morris interview, both because she did it and because Mike Morris, I think, is one of the best interviews on this roster right now. As we kind of wrap up here, last 10 minutes or so, Dana, I'm really curious about like where your mind is after OTAs and mini camp and the press conferences and what you've heard. Where's your mind on what's going on with the Seahawks right now? I think that it's really, I'm still at this point where I'm like, I don't know what's coming. We have to kind of wait and see, but you start to get a feel of the interactions with the players and the coaches, and the more press conferences obviously let us get to know them a little bit better. But I am feeling a little better about our new head coach. But I think that's because he seems to be lightening up and loosening up a little bit. And I don't mean funny. I just mean in the way he talks to people. He doesn't look like a scared deer anymore. And I like the confidence that he and Grubb and everyone have had when speaking about how well the install is going. That is something that we had to really think about for a while, was how well are they going to pick up this new, the new playbook, the new schemes, the new processes. And they seem super encouraged to the point where they canceled practice for tomorrow. So I think that that's a good sign to me. I think that makes me feel a little bit more comfortable that they're coming in and they're liking what they're seeing from these players. Now, we know that sometimes that's coach speak, right? And we know that they're telling people what they want to hear. I swear sometimes you hear the same press conferences from coaches all over the league all the time. But I just really feel like, would they be like, they would keep them there and they'd seem more concerned if they thought that this was going to be a problem. So that's encouraging to me. What about you, Jeff? You guys are coming from not quite opposite ends, but definitely different perspectives. And I know, like, as you said, you consume as much or more content about the Seahawks as anybody around. Where are you with the Seahawks right now and what you're seeing going on?
Yeah, I wonder if I can like monetize that. Like even the pull I had from like the comment you had that I connected that Brady Henderson comment. I feel like there's like a skill that I'm not taking advantage of in my everyday life. I don't know what I got to figure out. My Seahawk brain works different than if I could have that brain with my regular job, I'd be a far more successful. But I'd answer your question. Like, I'm just really excited. I'm really excited to see how this all plays out. And like, it's going to be nice to watch here. And it's easy for me to say this now. I was joking with that in our chat today, but like, I'm not stressed at all about what's going on. I'm really encouraged. The more I hear McDonald talk, the more I just think this guy has the chance to be a superstar. And I really believe it. And Brian, I think you did an awesome job going through the layers of that interview with Albert Breer. And for those who don't know what I'm talking about, Albert Breer does a weekly Monday morning column, like sort of what Peter King used to do. His opening was based on how Schneider ended up picking McDonald. And the layers that it took for the Seahawks to end up landing on Schneider, Brian did such a cool thing, just showing like how many things in a row had to hit for that to work out. And like 4 other teams could have hired him. And if they had beat the Chiefs. So I'm just like really excited to have him around. And we talked about this at the time, like there's so much like, who's his OC going to be? He doesn't know that many other coaches. Then he ends up with like the best OC in college football. And I just think the Seahawks are at such a good stage right now. There are some flaws with the roster. We could talk about the linebackers. I'm not particularly worried about that as much because I see that as a 1-year issue. And if it was 2013 and they had a position group like that, I would be stressed the hell out. I would be losing my shit. So I don't think they're there yet. So for me, if you have a bad group in year 1, that doesn't upset me. And they might be fine. So I'm not stressed out about that at all. Some people see this. They got to get 10 games to justify firing Pete. Like, I'm not there. So obviously there are questions. How good are the quarterbacks? We keep hearing about all these interceptions. Maybe the defense is doing well, but both sides of the ball are just so intriguing. Brian did a great show of which group might be better next year and who's going to improve more. But like, there's so many elements of this team, like what the defensive line is going, where the secondary could be, what the receiver group looks like. And listen, I would like the offensive line to look a little better and a little more secure, but I'm just really encouraged at where they are, like big picture, and where if they brought back Pete and Clint Hurd and Waldron, like I'll be honest, it would take a lot for me to get excited about this season, even if they drafted Byron Murphy. But the whole thing is just, it's trending in a way where I've wanted it to trend for a while, where I've just felt they've been getting beaten with details, and that's been driving me crazy. I know, Brian, you mentioned that Pete Russell thing, but really the things that have bothered me is just like how sloppy they've been, how far behind they felt in some things. I feel like they've really hit, and Schneider. And if you want an interesting Schneider tidbit, there's a story today from Dan Graziano, who was talking about like team building principles. This is a totally off rail thing. And buried in the story, Schneider tells a story. I don't know if he meant to say this on record, but he was talking about a screw up he made in the draft in 2017, which is like my biggest issue with this whole regime. If you ever want to get me going, ask me on the side. I don't want to waste your time on this. But he literally called out, he's like, the biggest mistake we made is when we had Cam and Earl, we had to replace them. We pushed up players in the draft, and we ended up drafting guys too early. And I drafted Tedrick Thompson way too early when I should have drafted George Kittle. I'm like, he said that on record? He like literally threw that kid under the bus. That quote is in the story. I sent it to like an actual beat writer. I'm like, did he mean to say that? And it was like, sometimes John does that when he's not around PR. And that quote like made my eyes pop out of my head. So if you want some like fun Seahawks content, go find that quote. It's wild.
That is part of what makes John also endearing, is like he will just put it out there, and he has learned over the years. I need to send a message to someone to at least like get him a good mic. I mean, when he's doing these national interviews and he sounds like he's underwater, like he's got his mouth hurt, and like it is the worst. Like somebody, like if PR is going to keep him from saying things, maybe it's part of the ploy that they don't want anyone to actually understand him, and so they give him crappy mics. But I'm curious. Last thing I want to ask you guys, Dana, I'm curious. What do you think about the fact that Mike McDonald gave them tomorrow off? There's literally 3 mandatory days in the off season ahead of training camp. And he said, goodbye, you don't need to come to one of them. And this is a team that is installing a new defense. It's a team that's installing a new offense. It's a team that had players like DK and Draymond and others not come to some of the voluntary stuff. I'm curious what your thoughts are. Like, is this like, hey, this is the guy lightening up, like you said, and winning the team over? Or do you think they might come to regret this? I'm making my own opinion as I even discuss it. So I'm curious what your thoughts are.
As you're saying it out loud.
Yeah.
They aren't the only team. There were a few other teams that also decided to cancel. And so I do think it's curious. One, it makes me feel better that if he was like, you know what, we're good. This feels really good. That they can go ahead and cancel this. And yet at the same time, I think that it's a little curious. It's like, is it too bold? Is your ego a little too big that this is just going to be great? Or really, you're just like, I got everything I want from these guys and I'm going to give them a little extra time. I don't know. I don't think it's a huge deal. I'm not going to lie. I think that it's really just probably him rewarding them for working really hard and giving them a little extra time off one day. I know that I believe they started like a week or so early, but I know that wasn't mandatory either. So really the only mandatory was this one. But I do think that it goes to show that he maybe has the temperature of the team. And they're like, we're good. We got this. It's not so different that we're not understanding it. But I can't imagine one day would come back to bite him in the ass, but let's just hope it doesn't.
What about you, Jeff?
My guess is he watched his linebacker group. He's like, I can't watch these guys until training camp. So I'm going to give them the time off. No, but honestly, I think there was I think it is the temperature of the room thing. I think he's probably encouraged with what he's seeing, and a couple guys went down today a little bit. Nothing serious apparently, but he's probably like, what's the upside? Let's give these guys something, kind of win the room over. And he's talked about kind of connecting the players, and my guess is it's more of that. And it made me a little laugh. There was a lot of alarmist behavior going on online, being like, what are they doing? I'm like, it's one day. Like, ideally they would practice. I am honest. Ideally they would practice every practice time. As someone who's expecting them to struggle with details, in an ideal sense, they would practice. But listen, I don't think one day is going to make a difference in any considerable fashion. And if it's something that Mike McDonald's come out as this hard ass guy, I think it's good to see him lighten up and kind of have temperature of the room. So I didn't think much of it, to be honest, but I don't know. I thought some of the alarmist behavior online was a little funny.
Yeah, well, that's why you are the Seahawks Twitter police. You go in and correct all this like hyperbolic behavior. That's what I like. We got to have a little siren that you put on your tweets to. It's like the Eric Hartman,
a nightstick. Yeah,
respect your authority, but
starting to look like him. Yeah,
yeah, no. But yeah, I mean, one of the things that I thought was fascinating about that decision, I think there's a lot of actually aspects, and this is why I talk about the Seahawks every single day, because everything to me is fascinating. But Ryan Grubb talked about not more than a week ago how he wished they had more days because they're trying to get the installs up. There's a lot of guys that aren't there. They're not getting as much time with the offensive linemen. Anthony Bradford just practiced for the first day today. This wasn't his 17th day or 15th or whatever it is. So I think it's interesting that Mike McDonald made this decision. I would love to be a fly on the wall to find out, was this a collaborative decision with his other coaches, or did he kind of unilaterally decide, this is the right thing to do, which is his right. But, it's to your point. I don't think this is the make or break of anything, but it did break, I think, the initial impression I've had of Mike McDonald, which is if there's time to practice and refine and improve, he's going to use it. And so it stood out to me as something that kind of breaks the pattern that so far has been what I think we've seen of him. But to that, argue against myself, he's been talking about how they've been ending practice 15 minutes early regularly and that they're getting their work in. And so it's just I'm learning about him, and it's kind of cool to kind of see these different sides of what is, I think, a guy with pretty high standards of what he expects from his team. All right, before we wrap, anything else that Dana on your mind, Jeff on your mind, that you wanted to throw out there before we get people back to whatever sports event that they want to watch tonight?
Yeah, I just want to say about the whole DK thing. People
Yeah.
have a meltdown. Either you like DK, you don't like DK, blah, blah, blah. They could not have sung his praises enough in the press conferences. They just think, and I think that the podcast I did earlier today with Camden, she asked me, what I thought of that. And I was just like, I think that Mike McDonald is so excited to have him on his team. Like, you could just see him. He was like giggling. So people can be pissy with him all he wants to, but I think his head coach absolutely loves him.
I think that's right. Jeff, how about you? Any closing thoughts?
I'm dreading this 6-week absence. I don't know what I'm going to do with myself. Your baseball teams are at least doing something. Mine is kind of hell. So I'm hoping, I'm excited, and apparently Brian's going on vacation too. So I don't know what I'm going to do with this emptiness. But yeah, there's a couple things. Like, I think we're getting the sense of like what Draymond Jones is going to be doing this year, which I think is really interesting. Apparently he looked great in camp. I think the other guy apparently that looked really good was Zach Charbonnet, and he's really flying under the radar. Apparently he's gotten a little more explosive, and there's been almost no talk of him. And I thought there was really cool stuff on Brian's show, and he was on 710 too. Ray Roberts was talking about some of the subtle things that Charles Cross has done, and the coaches Scott Huff have done with him in terms of getting him more on his details. I thought that was really cool. And it was interesting. Roberts on Brian's show was talking about how he would call Olu like after training camp last year and like really work with him. And he's the guy that I know Griffith talked about it on Brian's show as well. And I'm just shouting it all at Brian's shows. So you can see what I do with my time. But I think Olu's such a fascinating piece of what he develops this year. And they were talking about how Huff is really working on like his like lower body and his body type. And I think Scott Huff might be the guy. And Brian talked about this a lot in the offseason, that the offensive line coach is one of the most important hires on the team. And Andy Dickerson did some things really well. We saw the impact of Tom Cable, for better or worse, on both sides. He did things, yeah, whatever. I'm not going to get into that. But Scott Huff is a big X factor of this coaching staff. I think if he can change Charles Cross and Olu and make them take a step forward, that could have a seismic impact on the team.
Yeah, really, really well said. I think those are all great points. And it is not lost on me that I was bemoaning the lack of tomorrow's practice with Maura, because as somebody who's trying to plan daily shows, and I even have to plan weekend shows, even one less day of press conferences and news makes it a little bit harder. But I will be going on vacation a week from Friday, but I'm already creating additional content to fill in the days while I'm gone. So there's already 3 videos posted that will debut while I'm gone. I'm going to be creating enough content to cover while I'm out. I've got Gino Smith's every one of his game-winning drives. I've got today I just recorded the highlights of the secondary. Devin Witherspoon's best plays, Trey Brown's best plays, Julian Love's best plays from last year. And we'll have more. So we're gonna have 6 weeks to cover, and God knows I'm gonna be digging the bottom of the barrel for some of these topics, but that's what happens when you're obsessed with a team, and it's kind of fun to be obsessed with the Seahawks again. All right, I want to thank Dana O'Gorman at Dana OG on Twitter for coming around and blessing us with her Kansas City greatness. Jeff Simmons at Real Jeff Simmons on Twitter, and his Canadian all about the Seahawks was fantastic. And Maura Dooley was great. So great to have Maura on. Make sure you give her a follow, and we will see you all next week. Last show before I go on vacation for a little bit. And who knows who will get on the show next week. Until then, I'm Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Hawk Blogger. This has been another episode of Real Hawk Talk.